How you doing, my brother?
I'm good. Welcome, guys. Welcome back to Mantalk Season 6, Episode 3. We're now full steam ahead. We're now coming up to the middle part of the season. We hope you've enjoyed the episode so far. We know the last one was slightly heavy. A lot of facts, a lot of data, but we thought it was important. Keep your feedback coming as to how you like that kind of episode versus more light-hearted discussions. We're trying to find a balance here, and it comes from you, how we film these episodes. Oscar, welcome back. Another episode. Looking good.
How you doing?
Should we address it? Should we talk about it?
That's standard. Yes. Did you talk about the hat? Of course. Talk about the cap.
Yeah.
No cap.
No cap.
You know what I mean?
I like it. You've matched the grey, and the grey.
No cap. So yeah. You know, we were going for a bit of a look. You know, you always like set the bar when it comes to fashion. So I decided let me break out something. Let me break out a little something. Yeah. So like the idea is to have basically different hats and different like match concepts, and then you guys in the comments can let us know what you want and what you like, and then we can now produce them on scale.
Perfect.
So let us know what you like in the comments section. Let us know what you want, what type of merchandise you're interested in, and then Eli and I will try our best to like give you quality products.
We're just in the trial stages. This is just trial stages. We're just trying some things out, and obviously everyone in the project Arasa has a few quotes I know they'll like. So yeah, looking forward to that stage. Oscar, today's convo it's been a long time coming. It kind of relates to the last episode, talking about different places in the world, etc. But for everyone that can see on the title, today we are talking about diaspora, the perceptions from both ends, and just diving into that topic because I think it's something that people don't really talk about a lot in depth, and we feel like we're well placed to do that.
The idea of the diaspora experience is something that as Kenyans and as East Africans, I feel like has been romanticized a lot, but we have to also acknowledge the fact that Kenyans in diaspora and other East Africans are contributing a lot to the growth of the Kenyan economy. Just to introduce the problem, around 2015, diaspora income from remittances from people in diaspora exceeded tea as the highest foreign exchange earner in Kenya. So that's a big stat, meaning that Kenyans in diaspora are now contributing significantly to our economy, and we have to recognize them wherever they are, and they're also a huge part of the Mantalk community now. We're seeing a lot of views coming in from Kenyans in diaspora. So wagwan and shout out to everyone who's supporting us from UK, Canada, Australia, the US. All of you Kenyans, we love you guys. Continue to share and support with Mantalk. Like, share, subscribe.
Do you know what I've realized? You're becoming a pro. You're becoming a pro at this YouTube stuff. This like comment, subscribe thing. I'm
starting to get it.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
But what you said is definitely
like, share, subscribe.
Yeah, like, share, subscribe. Yeah. LSS.
Like, share, subscribe. LSS. Yeah.
I like that you talked about that. The using the word romanticizing of the diaspora, because I think that's the first place we can start, because I think when we talk about the problem, you've mentioned the financial aspect, that obviously mostly the intention when people do leave for diaspora or to go abroad and become expats is that they want to now send money back just because of the way economies work, right? But with that being the intention a lot of the time, aside from that, you find that when somebody does leave, there's also a social aspect that people don't really talk about, especially I can definitely say from my parents' generation, it's money driven. So you go there thinking about money, and you're not thinking about, different culture, different this, because you're just thinking tunnel vision, I'm going to make money and send back. And so when you leave, I'm assuming the perception of everyone you've left is that they've now gone to make money. So immediately there's an association of there's now going to be a lot of revenue coming from that individual. So I'd be curious to know, Oscar, just from from the Kenyan side of things, the first, because then I can sort of inform as to how accurate that is, the first impressions that you find maybe yourself and fellow Kenyans have when they first like meet a diaspora person that's sort of come back home. What's like the first impressions of that kind of individual?
Ila, I think you serve as a very good example of how Kenyans react to a Kenyan who's from abroad. Because you'll find that most of the time when I'm around you, interacting with other Kenyans, they treat you as if you're not quite Kenyan. You get what I mean? Like, you'll notice that there's that identity, like, it's like the Kenyan who comes from London is kind of put a bit on a pedestal rather than the local Kenyan themselves, which I find rather odd. But of course, there are a number of, the question now I start to ask myself is, what does a Kenyan from abroad represent to fellow Kenyans? Why is it that Kenyans themselves feel inferior compared to a Kenyan who's gone abroad and has had that experience? So the question is, if I went to London, would a Kenyan from London give me the same treatment that you receive when you come here? So I find that, like, how people react to you when I'm around you is how I've kind of reached my conclusion that there's a bit of an inferiority complex around Kenyans who are from diaspora. So the question now becomes, why do Kenyans perceive Kenyans who are in diaspora as superior to them? What exactly are the factors that contribute to that? And for me, one is, I think there's a perceived notion that Kenyans who are abroad are living a higher quality of life than Kenyans here because of income. So you will tell me how true that is. The second thing is the level of education is higher and the level of skill and expertise is higher than most Kenyans here. You'll also, I think you can also speak to that, though I know that the education systems here in Kenya have really tried their best to bridge the gap. And then there's also the strength of the institutions, that Kenyans perceive that abroad, the institutions there are stronger. So they don't have that much access to services. So they perceive you as a Kenyan who has studied and lived abroad as having all these things put together in you as a person. I think that's how I'd answer that question. Yeah.
Yeah, you've meant
What do you think? What do you think?
You've mentioned a few things that definitely I can attest to. I have a massive. So you've mentioned the. Because here's the thing. If I'm just going to be very frank. So when I sort of came back to Kenya and I didn't really know anyone, and the reason that even some things sort of worked out for me is because of that complex that you've talked about. And if I'm very honest, it's something that really frustrates me because it speaks to a larger problem of the colonization that's still in a lot of people's minds. Because the fact that somebody from that sort of country you've put on a pedestal, it just means that you associate that country on such a high level that any product from that is already on a pedestal. So you might be doing something even better in Kenya, but when someone comes from abroad, you're immediately thinking that they're better just because there's that preconceived notion that's dated back all the way back there. Which is why, for me, when somebody compliments my accent, I get angry. Like, I don't like the whole, oh, you're British. It really annoys me. It really frustrates me because it's like, okay, where's that value system come from? You've initially thought that the way you speak because you're from a certain place is somehow better than the other person, but then sometimes you find that the vocabulary of somebody in Kenya might even be higher. So the same language that people sometimes like adore, you've actually got maybe even better language than that person, but it's just the way that they're speaking, right? I remember I was speaking to one girl. Because surely language is about vocabulary, not about accent, because accent is just accent is just perspective, isn't it? It's just how the PR of that nation has done something. So I remember there was this one girl, and she was talking about how she wants the most beautiful girl, right? Beautiful girl. I think she's even in modeling, that sort of thing. And I was talking to her about like the perceptions of this, and how she was like, my sister's married like a white guy. You know, he came from Britain. This, and this. And then I was telling her about I basically said, you know, not everybody that comes from there, even if they're white or black, is well off, right? Like that's just not. It's not just a fact of life. And then she was like, yeah, but he was like white. He was like big. So, you know, obviously the association with her was like, if you're big and white, you have money because you eat well outside. That was where it ended. And I was like,
sorry? Yeah. I'm not sure I had that
yes.
side. So because he was
larger, so obviously
big,
you're
as in
affluent.
big, when you say big, what do you
You're
mean
affluent because you're large, and you've now come from there. And I was saying to her,
wait, large in terms
body,
of body, like
yeah.
he has a
body,
tummy.
yeah,
Or
because
what?
that you associate that with affluence. So I was baffled. I was like, this is really this is, and I was thinking if that's the,
but that's an African standard of wealth. Even here in Africa, we say young boys have apartments, which is 6 packs and all that. But men in Africa, we have mansions. We carry around mansions. Our stomachs are full.
Which is a dangerous notion, because surely affluence means access. No, I mean, even in the so I said to her, I was like, most large people.
Right. But I can see where it came from.
I said to her, I was like, most large people from the UK are probably less well off because they haven't had access to healthier foods, and where they've lived means that they've been eating junk food, and maybe their education on nutrition is not higher. So the person you're celebrating might even be from a lower. So the quote unquote people doing well are probably going to be slimmer, more in shape, more attuned to a healthy lifestyle. That's a whole nother topic. But it speaks to that.
I feel like you're right.
Yeah.
You're right. You're right.
So that's just a prime example.
You're right. The science is there, but like I understand the reasoning. I understand the reasoning, Eli. Her reasoning is very traditional, but I understand it. That's all I'm trying to say. It's not correct, but I understand it. I understand it.
So that's so that was just a perfect example. So when I hear somebody say, but what I have seen as well is I can't blame people back home too much, because I've also hanged around with some people from diaspora who have really lent into that. And as a result of that, like their attitude to people, they have that superiority complex. And for me, I've seen it manifest itself, and it can be frankly disgusting at points, because they're playing into that, oh, I'm from here. But then when I'm talking to them now as a fellow diaspora, and I'm talking to them about what they do as their job and stuff, I'm like, I know how much money you make. So the fact you've come with that superiority complex doesn't match, because you're talking to some people that are actually probably more intelligent and more educated and more well off than you, but you immediately think dollar or pound, even if you're working a different kind of job, is superior. So I've seen where that narrative can come from at the same time.
You know the thing that I find quite crazy, especially because I am as African can get. When you meet people who have, let's say, who are from the diaspora, and they have made the assumption that whatever you are saying does not necessarily have the same level of,
gravity.
Research or level of knowledge or information. The level of gravity that, you'd rather have when an African speaks to you. So the unfortunate thing is when you come at an African with that perspective, Africans, we tend to be very, we don't pick the fights. We don't pick fights that are unnecessary.
Yeah.
And I remember there was one time I had we don't pick unnecessary fights. We are very, because we can tell you're wallowing in your own madness. So why should I join you in that madness? Fighting, African proverb, don't fight with a madman lest he gets his dirt onto you. So that's something that Africans understand very well. So we are very good at looking at someone who's clearly delusional and leaving them in their own delusion. So, we'll just look at you. And I'm sure you can say this because there was a story you gave me about your dad and him calling the gas man for the house. And the guy was a middle-class British citizen calling your father, who is as African as it can get, and hearing his accent and assuming that this is somebody who you can just, go over and not take seriously, and how wrong that entire concept was, and your dad probably didn't do anything about it. Just learned you're mad to even think that way. So for me as an African, I can say that Africans right now are in the middle of a renaissance in terms of their own knowledge, their own information, and their own culture. And this is why maybe Africans abroad are able to relate with our content, because they're able to see that for once, Africans are not being portrayed as poverty, the whole poverty narrative around Africans. That's not going to happen here at Mantalk.ke. Here at Mantalk.ke, we are capable young men, and everyone on set, including Beryl and Big Boy Eric, are very capable. They look They look mad good. Like they look mad good. In fact, Beryl today looks especially good. It's a shame you can't see on camera. We're protecting her from you, backward, backward people thinking that Africa is still chasing lions or some nonsense. So yeah, for us as Africans, we are very good at leaving you in your own delusion. That's the point I'm trying to get at. So we won't try and argue with you if you sit down and think that an African opinion is an inferior opinion. Because the internet has made it very clear that everyone in the world is trying to figure it out, that nobody necessarily has a plan, and all of us are just looking towards God, if you believe in one, and like, you know, our own progression to be able to give ourselves the lives that we want. So that's my perspective on people who think Africans are inferior. You're mad. Like, you have no idea how dumb you sound sometimes.
Can't be further from the truth.
Yeah,
Honestly.
you're mad. You're like mad.
What you've spoken to the point of everyone's just trying to figure it out, right? And I mentioned at the beginning that, you know, in the 90s when first generation went abroad, they were probably the people that were trying to figure it out, and their option for figuring it out was leaving and finding sort of greener pastures, even though that's again an issue. But so I want to talk about the reality of those greener pastures sometimes, that maybe conversations people don't get to have with somebody that's been there. Because like I said, some people lean into that and they'll never tell people what the reality is on the ground. What's that sort of the saying our generation always says? Kawa groundly different or something. Say it?
Kwa ground vituni different. So in Kiswahili it means on the ground. Yeah, kwa ground vituni different. Yeah. So in London, kwa ground vituni different. In London, on the ground, things are different.
It's so true. So I think what happens is, you know, the notion that the streets are paved with gold, because I've even spoken to my mum and she was like, because my mum was 26, 7 when she left, when she was going to London, and she was expecting when she gets there, it's Kensington everywhere. That was the perception of a young 20-year-old lady going to England. You know, it's going to be Kensington, Chelsea, So people don't recognize the entry point when you're going somewhere else, when you're moving abroad. Right, unless there's obviously exceptions when you're extremely affluent and you enter at that level of society. But for most people that go abroad, they've seen the job online, they've calculated that this is how much you can make, but you don't know the living expenses truly until you're there. And especially in the 90s, it's very hard to know how much groceries cost, your gas, all these little small things, even what's a good postcode, what's a good area, and the system. So you find that you enter at a level that is lower than what you were back home. And then there's a shock. Woo! There's a shock. You land there and you're like, wait a minute.
Jesus.
I was living in an 8-bedroom house with an SQ, with a house manager, house help. My life was very nice. And then I thought, because I'm at this level, let me now go and explore the Western world. But you enter the Western world down here. You enter down here, not even because of your skill set or anything, just because I have a problem with the terminology expat versus immigrant, because it's the same thing. So I'm going to keep saying expat. As an expat, entering that sort of country, you're already at a disadvantage. And I always say, life is hard already. Why would you add another stress? So you find you'll enter there and you're not able to maybe even get an equal job. I've definitely seen with some people, you can't get the equal job that you had over there, because you're already looked down on. And we're going to get into the whole education conversation in a moment. You enter there, then you realize your living expenses versus your salary is high. You don't understand the way this works, so you're at constant disadvantages. And then now you've got the added stress of probably pressure from people back home saying, well, you've left now, so come on, where's the cash?
Send us money. Send us money.
And then you can't say to them, yo, I'm living in this postcode. Remember when we had that conversation in Social House, or other restaurants are available? Remember when we had that? When we had that conversation about healthcare and different postcodes. I remember we had that conversation, right? Yeah. So you don't realize when you're moving there, you look at the rent and you think this is cheap, I can afford this. But you don't realize the kind of environment you'll even bring your kids up in. That's why you find a lot of first generation, they're not in very nice areas, and that kind of now starts to inform their lifestyle. So you have all of these factors that you didn't know, and you get there, and now you're on a trajectory of trying to come out of that because you didn't realize where you sort of entered in. So a lot of people are struggling, and the jobs that you have to work are, although maybe the pay looks good, they're sometimes very demeaning jobs. You'll find that, for instance, when I used to, before I retired, when I used to go out to like nightclubs and things like that, you'll find that when you go to the bathroom, it's always an African guy that gives you the spray to sort of make you feel better. And I used to always make a point of talking to them, right? These are guys now working in a toilet. I'll talk to them. A lot of them are like, yeah, I've got a master's, I've got a PhD, I've got this. Every single one of them had at least a master's. So can you imagine when someone left with a master's, what they think they're going to do when they go to England? And now when they're reporting back, you can't say you're working in a toilet. Do you see what I mean? So a lot of these guys, they've got such added stress and such pressures. And then now when they come back home, you're supposed to be like homecoming king, but it's tough for a lot of people. It's only a very few. Personally, I've been very fortunate just because life happens that way with my dad and his education. But for a lot of people that are very same skill set, it doesn't happen sometimes. And I've seen that across the board. Like, people are really struggling. And that's why I want them not to be as celebrated when they come home, because that's another added pressure, you know?
There's something I also noticed when, during my limited time in London, I noticed that being minorities, there's a lot of gatekeeping by the white majority. So basically, you can be having the same level of education. You can both attend, let's say, a top tier university. You are in the same class. You probably have better grades. But when it comes to the job market, this person already knew the opportunities that they had.
Exactly.
Vis-a-vis you, who has to literally start from the bottom and create the whole social network so that you can be able to like elevate your generation to the top. Like, you see, you, Eli, are now a second generation immigrant. And that means that there's a lot of the stresses that your parents already, second generation expat.
We would never say
immigrant. Call it what you like.
Say immigrant.
In fact, here in Kenya, here in Kenya, expatriates are treated like royalty. They're paid a hardship allowance because apparently it is so hard to enjoy the fresh meat that has no genetically modified products, or the fresh produce from our motherland that has no genetic modification. It's very tough. It's a
hard life
to enjoy the fresh bananas. It's a hard life, you know, drinking fresh water that's not necessarily as processed, where we have a higher life expectancy because of how healthy we are as Africans.
Preach.
It's very
Preach
tough.
on it.
Yeah, they're paid a hardship allowance because, you know, our weather does not have winter. So we constantly have the sun. It's really tough, you know. So they are paid, expatriates who come from other countries to work in Kenya are paid literally hardship allowances. So they are financially incentivized to live their very, 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 very easy winters where they literally have to air condition their homes and houses and heat their homes and houses. And where there's a whole gas industry for that specific thing that does not exist here because we live on the equator. But anyway, it's tough. It's tough. It's tough living in Africa when you're wealthy. It's really hard. And
you don't get the same.
So
it's not
these
reciprocated
expatriates.
now when you go over there.
Yeah, exactly. And and when you go over there, no. You go to the lowest of the low neighborhoods. That's where you're expected to start. And the children these people who have generations of connections, generations of knowledge and information as to how the economy has been running, create basically a working class that consists largely of immigrants so that they can live in the comfort of their homes. And then they tell you everything is going to be all right. So from me, where I'm sitting as an African, it's not that I do think that there are certain merits. For example, education and the skill level that you can bring back to Kenya and just grow it. The biggest advantage is that as a country, Kenya is just over 40 years old. So we achieved independence in 1964. So that means that we are about 55, I think, 54 years old, which means that we are only commencing our journey as a state, whereas these states have been, these larger democracies such as the US, UK have been in existence for a very, very protracted amount of time. So that means that as Africans, we can accelerate our development using the information and skill that they give us. And I do agree that when it comes to systems, we are still trying to create institutions that are dependable and strong. And we're still learning that. So that learning curve might be perceived as inefficient, terrible. But ask yourself, where were these countries 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago? Where were they, really? In fact, those 100 years ago, 200 years, 300 years ago, there was still slavery. Ask yourself, how much has the African economy been disenfranchised by slavery if we compound it?
We're going to go there. Let's go there. Yeah.
Ask yourself, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's since we are going to talk about the diaspora, let's ask ourselves, really, these people who are treating Africans disproportionately, if Africa retained its, and I'm sure there's a report somewhere, it's just that we haven't done the research. If Africa retained its level of skill and the people that were taken there through the West Atlantic slave trade, through the slave trades that were there, perpetrated on East Africans that are rarely ever reported, but we did have slavery in East Africa as well. Don't assume that because it wasn't reported, it wasn't there. Yeah, there was slave trade throughout Africa. If we had those talents, if we had those Africans right now in Africa, how productive would we be? How many inventions? How many inventions are sitting in different patent offices across the world that were made by Africans, so that the world can look at us?
Yeah. Also, ripple effect. Even the ripple effect. We're talking. If we're going to go to that place, all of that, how that messed up our economy, how the slavery and things happened, the whole colonization. Now, if we're thinking about the ripple effect to now how trade deals and global economics and politics played a part of how we are where we are now, then we're talking about a whole feedback loop here, because the situation we're in now is not a result of our own doing anyway. Do you see what I mean? So that's another thing. Yeah. But that's a whole other topic. If I go there, my vein will start. I don't.
Yeah, that's a whole that's a whole other topic that if we decide as Africans to start interrogating, because young Africans now, with the internet and with knowledge, we are starting to ask ourselves, so the entire narrative surrounding, that the whole world is more superior than you in many ways, that we were particularly force-fed. Like, if you look at what we are taught in history, in our classrooms, we are taught about British colonization, we are taught about the migration systems in Africa. We know our history. We have our grandparents who are here to give us that history. We also know the history that existed, that we had a culture before the white man came. We know it. Now, too bad. The game is up. The jig is up. Africans now know who they are, where they come from, what they do, what they want. The jig is up. It's only a matter of time before we start saying, like Ghana has done with Cocoa.
Come on now.
We start saying, value addition will not be done abroad. It will be done here.
Yeah.
Now you're in
real
trouble.
I think the greatest thing they did when colonizing was not colonizing us physically, but more mentally, because they made more money from how they mentally colonized us because of global standings later on. So I sometimes think that even the whole point of it wasn't even for immediate effect. It was delayed gratification in terms of resource for them. Because if we're looking at how much they've paid and even reparations and stuff now, if that was a foresight, then whoever did that, I can't even fault them, because that's fantastic economics. If that was what they were doing.
Let me tell you a country that has really, we should really look at. I know that China gets it really gets demonized by the press. But you have to understand that China has lifted a significant percentage of its population, never seen before in history. Just a few years ago, they were going through a 20-year-long famine. I want you to understand that 20 years, the entire lifespan of a child to an adult is going through famine. And they told themselves, I remember Chairman Mao said that we will never be disgraced like that again. Chinese said, we will never be disgraced like that again. And they looked at these systems that are working, America specifically. And once they started to imitate, now they're the largest economy in the world. Straight up. Yeah, they're the ones who have come to Africa to build our roads, to do all these things. Yes, we admit that there are a few controversies as to the cost of that relationship. Means
to an end.
But the reality is, as Africans, we have to start asking ourselves, what is the value that, have we built our own table? Have we building our own table where we serve the meals on that table? Or is it that we are waiting for foreigners to come and tell us what exactly to do so that we can be able to create this table? We need to build our own table. We need to retain our own skill. And those Africans who are abroad need to come back and help us put up systems that work. So that because we are young countries, a lot of these countries, I think the first country in Africa to gain independence from Britain was Ghana, which is 1962, if I'm not wrong, with Kwame Nkrumah. Now we have Kenya, came shortly thereafter with Jomo Kenyatta in 1964, and then we had Tanzania in a similar fashion. This is in the 60s and the 50s. That was when Africans really attained their independence. And South Africa just recently left the apartheid system, 1994. Yeah. That's when the apartheid system was fully and completely abolished. So only now are Africans beginning to participate in world economics and geopolitics in the way that the white man has participated in history. Yeah. And don't think for a second that, anyway, we digress from Africans in diaspora, but I think it's very important to put the conversation in context.
100%.
You know, of
There's
how
a lot of factors at play.
There are a lot of factors at play. And you have to understand that a lot of the Pan-Africanists who left their countries to go and study abroad and come back and become the first presidents of the country were essentially Africans in diaspora.
Yeah.
The Pan-African movement, I know for a fact, there was once a time when Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, I think, and other African presidents were all in London at the same time.
Yeah.
I can put that up.
Yeah.
They're all in London at the same time, and all these men came back and became the first president. So when we talk about Africans in diaspora, there's been huge benefits for those generations that went before. But Africans now have to ask themselves, is it really worth it? Like, is it really worth it?
Yeah.
You know, going to those systems and...
100%.
Yeah.
There's something you've mentioned,
like
really, that's really key in terms of, the first president's going abroad, studying abroad, and even just the education aspect. And we touched on that with, some people with higher education still not being able to, attain jobs or get wealth like they could do back home, right? And I was sitting down and I was thinking about certain subjects. Okay, when we talk about subjects like English, etc., obviously these are subjects that are very much lent towards the the colonized countries and Western countries, right? But if we're talking about education and topics that are like fact-based, right?
Yeah.
And then I look at the education system and the intelligence of Africans with sometimes limited resource versus the intelligence of the Western world and my peers, people my age group, in an education system that, kind of helps you thrive, so to speak. And I look at sometimes the results, right? And it makes me think that sometimes you'll find that the Africans are much, much more intelligent a lot of the time. And that's because when you look at something like physics, there's no way that somebody can say that being taught physics, that's fact-based, physics, somewhere in America, you're learning better than somewhere in Africa. Because if it's fact-based, if you learn an equation, you learn an equation. So now my question comes, because when it comes to sciences and fact-based, when you learn an equation, you learn an equation, right? If you're researching something, the only problem you have is resource. That's the only problem you have.
That's a tough one, especially when you look at something like there are global mathematics competitions. And the strength of certain skills like mathematical skills are very much based on repetition and training. I can tell you that for Africans, a lot of, especially my personal experience, like I can only speak from my personal experience, I had a huge issue with mathematics in my formal education because mathematics was not taught in an interesting and interactive manner. When you look at how mathematics is taught in these international institutions, when I got exposed to, let's say, business math, I really enjoyed business math. I really enjoyed things like the value of compounding. I really enjoyed the economics that I read when I was exposed to finance and the metrics therein. I really enjoyed it. But you see, the method of education for an African system, now that we are discussing it, the method of education, especially in Kenya, was based on the 4K system. So the 4K system was, in Kiswahili, is kulima, kusoma, there's a 4K system. So basically, the 4K system, I'll remember the exact thing. Remind me to tell you. But the 4K system basically focuses on practical skills, like practical first world skills. Africans are not necessarily taught critical thinking or what's empirical studies. That level of education was excluded from Africans for a very long time. Only now are Africans being exposed to critical thinking, like what you and I are doing on this live, studying empirical things on an empirical basis, like chemistry, physics, like questioning and asking yourself, how can I experiment on concepts, and how can I scale those concepts? Those ideas were not necessarily in our African education. That has only started now, very recently. In fact, we might actually be the first generation, if not second, in this country to have that level of education. First, second, or third. We can't be higher than that.
Okay, but
before, education was just...
I hear you, but my point is,
for the
even
farmer,
with that kind of, you're saying, maybe limited education that you're saying, you still find that when you go abroad, when you go to, for instance, London to go to hospital, or you're going to find a doctor, you'll find that a lot of them are expats that have come from Africa or come from these other countries. So with that base level of education, they're still managing to compete with people that have had these kind of more favorable educations, right? So I think it kind of so I'm saying, like, even though that baseline maybe not be celebrated or not be seen as efficient, even with that we're still excelling. Do you see what I mean? So we're still managing to excel. So then so then it kind of, for me, it begs the question that, now when you go to London or you go to America to get a degree, and then now it's internationally recognized, surely that's now speaking to the whole like geopolitical systems that are celebrating certain countries' educational institutions more than Africans. Because here's the thing, when I was watching this thing about like Ivy League schools in America, and when you're looking at this history of his system of how they become Ivy League, it's just because of a community that decided it's Ivy League and I want them to go there. So it was all based on postcode. So there was no factual basis of this being a more intelligent area for people to get educated. So and it's the same thing in England. You see it in some postcodes. Somebody decides to put their house at a higher price, just sell it there, and the price of that whole road just changes over a period of time. So it's with the community setting a precedent and a value on their system, so their education system. So if I'm saying, like, if you find an African not celebrating their universities, their institutions, then now on a geopolitical standpoint, everyone else isn't going to celebrate if you don't celebrate yourself. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah. Keep going. You're on a roll. Keep going.
No,
You're on a roll.
No, but that's just what. That's right. So my thing is, like, a lot of the time, education is like a lot to do with perspective, because you'll find that now all these rich people in Africa will now send their kids, like, maybe to like abroad to now study, and you're going to find that those brilliant minds are leaving the country. You're finding yourself in another brain drain, right? Because a lot of them don't come back because they see, let me go live where it's already like established, developed. They don't want to come back. Perfect example of this is basically the reason my dad sort of left is now by the systems and the institutions failing back down to corruption, which is a whole other thing we need to sort out. But like, the reason I ended up in England is because when my father was working on a project to do with one of Kenya's first cars, there was so much corruption in that process. They were working hard, and then you're finding that parts aren't arriving. Computer laptops that were meant for now the research and development department never arrived because somebody stole. And then a lot of them got so frustrated. These are now brilliant engineers. They got so frustrated, they leave, and then my dad ends up working for Land Rover for like 30 years. Somebody else ends up working for someone else for like 30 years in different countries. So dad goes to Germany, his friends go to here. And now when they're sort of talking later, what did you do in life? It's like, I've been in Japan for this amount of time. I've been here for this amount of time. And so you find that those brilliant minds have now gone to assist other economies and other development, where they now celebrate their automotive industry. Whereas if they were here in Kenya, maybe they'll be able to compete at the same level. I remember he took me on a tour of the factory, and he was saying that this car was developed the same time as, I think, is it Skoda or something like that, like another Eastern car. And now he's like, look how far they've come, because they managed to keep everything in-house, keep their industry going, and they were probably assisted by people that left from these kind of countries. Do you see what I mean? So I think there's a lot to speak to when it comes to education, intelligence, and the perception of intelligence, and where that's attained on a global scale. Because now you'll find
Yeah.
you're losing your brilliant minds. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're very right. You're very right. That's a very good point. Just to cap it off, one of my favorite authors, I will continue to quote him until the day he hollers at us. Scott Galloway in Post-Corona. Yeah. That guy. Might end up in Stan School of Business one day. Shake his hand, you know. So Scott Galloway in Post-Corona talks about education and how the world now has become aware that essentially Ivy League education has become like a luxury brand, like the Hermes of education, or the Louis Vuitton of education, where functionally it might not necessarily be as revolutionary as all of us are led to thinking, and they are making a lot of money off of the brand perception.
Branding.
Sounds like a luxury brand, right? So just good branding. I do admit that, yes, there are a number of skilled lecturers, but look at how much lecturers make. One skilled lecturer can service, let's say, 100 students in one lecture, especially when it's done online. How much is each student paying for that specific lecture per semester? How much is the university making from that specific lecture per semester? So basically, students are chaining themselves to debt to an institution that is meant to empower them financially. And you see, for us as Africans, because we're already like under the heel of the geopolitical situation, that loss is compounded. And that's something that, you can only realize if you're an African trying to, let's say, sell a global product, or you're trying to export something. You'll find that the checks that you have to go through and the cost to which you must reach in order to sell products, in order to show your education, basically the value of your education, is compounded tremendously by the fact that there are already so many regulatory checks before you as an African can be able to create an export. Me and you right now are able to have a global reach because YouTube doesn't necessarily have checks it doesn't necessarily have those crazy regulatory checks. So what we're doing right now on mantalk.ke is an exportable product that can be enjoyed globally without those regulatory checks. However, when you look at the cost per view, basically how much we make per view as, let's say, this is now a YouTube channel, the weighting for an African country is much less than the weighting for an American country. Wagwan. Again, we are going back to the same issue where they'll say, yeah, the view. Are you trying to tell me that the view
is worth more in America? What?
Yeah, are you trying to say that's what I'm trying to tell you? Like, okay, what's the purchasing power? But it's true, like if you can peg it in economics, but economics has always had this one-sided view. Especially when you look at Africans and the promotion of products that we consume. Most of the products we consume are fast-moving consumer goods. Most of the products we consume are fast-moving consumer goods. So the value of a view for a fast-moving consumer good company, like let's say beverage company, water company, food company, it might even be more than because bread, let me not get into the figures, but like it might actually be more.
Yeah.
So that's something that I just find, it's reflective. Since you're talking about like
it's just a bit funny.
Yeah, it's just funny.
It's just a bit funny that.
We can tell David Dobrik.
There's a little disconnect to it.
Why isn't like support us YouTubers from Africa?
Yeah.
It's.
I hear that.
Yeah, we do.
You've talked about something.
Yeah, we're 2 billion.
So key, branding. And this is something me and my sister, at least once every 3 months, we have a rant about. We have a rant about branding and PR. Because I don't think we've realized how essential PR is in Africa. Because here's the thing, the reason you have a diaspora is because of PR. You don't know what the country's like until you get there. Do you know what I mean? And you find that's why, again, geopolitical, if you're not branding yourself properly, then when you're now in those summits, when you're negotiating trade deals, the perception of the person you're doing a deal with is already a certain way. Because if we've allowed people to just come to Africa and brand us and send any image out that they want, right? So I feel like that's another... I don't want to... This isn't we're here now. But I don't want to go into it too much.
No,
but
go.
like,
Yeah, we're doing it. We're doing
but here's the thing: if we look at somewhere like Dubai, right, your immediate thought of Dubai is big skyscrapers, luxury, Louis Vuitton,
Luxury.
you know, Hermes, all this sort of stuff, all this stuff. But if you think about Africa, the first thing people think is dust, kids, and a safari maybe. That's it. That's it. That's the first thing you think about, because we've allowed people, like when you have a house, you don't like allow somebody to come in and look at your most dirty room and take pictures. You say, no, please go to the lounge. We've cleaned the lounge. Please take photos of the lounge. Please go to the ensuite. You know, you don't say come to the garage and start taking pictures of where our mess is. But I feel like we've allowed people to do that for so long, and we don't realize how much damage that does on a global scale, because then you find all these problems. We've already had the struggle of history, and now, like you said, we sort of compound that with now how we react in terms of portraying ourselves. There's a quote that I think a lot of Nigerians say is never look like your problems. And I think that's something that like we've done a lot of the time. If we've got issues, we're like, oh guys, we've got issues, help. Like we've just sort of thrown our hands up. And even when it comes to things like respecting our own resource and stuff, that's why we find that we can, you know, have trade deals that don't benefit us in terms of just resource, because we're not valuing ourselves the same way other people do. Because if we actually stop and look at what do you bring to the table on a global scale, could you be self-sufficient, right? A lot of the time, Africa probably could, if all of these trade and things, if resource and everything was distributed fairly, and these trade deals and this colonization, all this history wasn't a part of it. If we're just saying, okay, everyone go back to your country and good luck. If everyone did that, who would thrive?
You'll be surprised. Yeah, you ask yourself. Yeah, that's the good question. That's a very good question. I've seen my guy Ludacris is now a citizen of Gabon. I'm sure he can shoot fast and furious 10 or 12 in Gabon and show us Africans, you know, how much value are black and African people really giving to the world, and how much value are we getting back? You know, and you know, most of these economies, what I'm finding really, really interesting when I sit down and think about it, the contribution that historically black and African people have had is so immense. And everyone is trying to figure out how to integrate them into their culture without that necessarily being fiction. But Africans are so talented, so gifted in the things that they do, that they've carved niches and communities out of themselves. And like, this is why I usually tell you, like, for me, my inspiration will forever remain, not, you know, as an African, of course, who understands his heritage, but I stay inspired by Africans all over the world, because they are able to create value in different and diverse ways. Just recently, I think there was a Kenyan who was in Forbes Europe, Melanin Capital, the founder. His name is Minjire. He's gone to Europe. He's built a business that is getting European recognition. And now he's back. And like, you know, you sit down and you ask yourself, like, this is an African, educated in African schools, has eaten African food, has lived an African life, and he has gone and had impact. Are you really telling me that the expatriates from Africa don't deserve a hardship allowance like you guys? In fact, we need the hardship allowance.
Yeah. There's more hardship.
From what I'm seeing with George, there's more hardship. Because I'm seeing George Floyd, I'm seeing these things, and even me, I'm like, do I really as an African want to risk my neck by going to these countries? Pay us hardship allowance. The sun here is very hot.
We miss our vitamin deficiency that happens. We need an allowance to be able to eat the best foods that can give us those vitamins that we're losing here. We need to be able to shop organic. That's more expensive, you know?
Yeah, it's very hard.
It's tough.
Yeah, shop organic. Hey, how much is an avocado? How much is an avocado?
There's a lot of import. There's a lot of taxations. It gets very high, Oscar. Let me put it that way. It gets...
yeah. You deserve a hardship allowance.
Whereas in Kenya, it's just the cost of petrol.
Give my African friends a hardship allowance.
It's just the cost of petrol.
Yeah, here our avocados are literally falling from the trees. It's hard to pick them, as you can imagine. And make avocado toast. It's very tough to pick it's very rough to pick the avocado toast that I'm seeing the expatriates getting hardship allowances. So give Kenyans hardship allowances, because they have to pay in your shops for the food they'd be getting in their mother's home for free. We have yams. Have you ever tasted yams? Have you ever had a taste of a yam? Fresh from the ground. Arrow roots. Have you ever had it?
Come on.
No,
it's
I
rough.
know. Google.
Yeah.
Google these
Yeah,
things.
guys, when you come to
It's rough. Yeah, they are. It's rough in Kent.
But even when you do get them over here, it's just not the same. It's not the same. There's 2 points, because I think we're wrapping now, but there's 2 points I just want people to leave with. Maybe 2 terminology we should change, right? Is when we're talking about, and this comes back down to the PR, it comes back down to the respect we have for ourselves when addressing ourselves, is I just want everyone, when talking about diaspora, to stop using the word immigrant, because anyone that's left your country to work elsewhere, regardless of the industry, regardless of how much money you're making, is an expatriate. When somebody leaves a country and they're not supposed to be there, that's an immigrant. But you'll find that everyone says immigrant straight away just because you're black. But if a white person comes, they're an expat. So let's change those terminologies. Because if you're working legally...
We're also expatriates.
Yeah, we're expatriates. If you're working legally,
you're an expatriate.
Even that man that's working in the toilet, you're an expat. Bro, you're an expat. There's obviously other things that needs to change to help. But like, maybe let's start changing with the terminology. The other thing I want to just say on behalf of like other sort of diaspora is that a lot of the time when we do come back to Kenya, what I'd ask for, let me speak for myself, what I'd ask for is to still be treated like I am a Kenyan. Because a lot of time I feel like I'm not. And we already have been abroad and we've got a lack of identity there. When somebody's come home, they're trying to come to exactly that, home. So rather than ostracizing and assuming privilege, let's maybe embrace, and then it will encourage more, right? Because I've personally found it a lot of the time, right? You get called Mzungu, you get called these things, and as much as it can be jokes and things like that, it's actually very difficult for somebody that's sort of come back, you know, they've already been the black person out there, and you come back and you're now the white person in your... It's rough. It can be seriously rough sometimes. So that's what I would... that's one thing I'd want to sort of leave guys thinking about. Basically,
from my perspective as an African, I think the world needs to stop perceiving Africa as this place where, we think we're inferior. If you ever met me in person, you will be surprised at how wrong that perspective is. And Africans are now coming up with pride and are able to lift themselves with pride. And for those Africans who are in diaspora, we are very happy to see Africans forming communities, Kenyans forming communities abroad. There's a lot of Kenyan communities abroad. We appreciate you. We love you. And continue to lift our brand up high. And bringing the bacon back home makes a huge difference for our economy. So thank you so much to all those guys who dedicate themselves to creating a life for themselves abroad despite of the difficulties. I think it's good for them to be recognized in this moment as Africans who are raising the banner up high, especially if they're doing it in legitimate means, through legitimate business and in legitimate means. I'm very, very cognizant of the fact that it's not easy out there. So yeah, I think they deserve that pat on the back and that respect as Africans who are abroad. Yeah. And let's love each other. Let's just love each other. Come back home. Guys, also come back home. Let's come back to the motherland. Let's just love. Let's eat. Let's just eat the best food. Let's live in the sunshine. Let's grow our economy. Let's try to take a leaf out of Ghana's book, because the trajectory they're on, we need more of that. So guys, come home. And when we come home, love us like your own. Okay? Okay, amazing, bro. I think that's it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this. Let us know if you've liked this. If you've liked this episode, if you're in diaspora, you want to have this conversation more, let us know as well. We'll be very interested in doing that with you too. See you the next week, Oscar, for another one of these episodes. I can't wait. I hope you can't too, man. Yeah, I can't wait. Another one. Another one. And shout out to my diaspora people. Shout out to my people. Another banger. Another banger. See you later, guys. All right, bye. Cheers.